In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and winding roads, there lived a woman named Clara. She was the kind of person who radiated warmth and kindness wherever she went. Her smile could brighten even the gloomiest of days, and her gentle nature made her loved by everyone in the community. Clara wasn't someone who cared much for fancy clothes or expensive things. Instead, she found joy in simple pleasures, cooking hearty meals, tending to her garden, and spending time with her family. One sunny afternoon, Clara decided it was time to do something she had been putting off for months. Her old sedan, which had served her faithfully for years, was starting to show its age. It sputtered when she turned the key, made strange noises on the highway, and occasionally refused to start altogether. Though it still managed to get her from one place to another, Clara knew it wouldn't last much longer. She needed a new car, something reliable that could handle her daily trips to the grocery store, school events, and visits to see her grandchildren. With this thought in mind, Clara got dressed in her usual outfit, a pair of comfortable jeans, a soft sweater, and a pair of sneakers, and headed out the door. The local car dealership was just a short drive away, and as she pulled into the parking lot, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Buying a car was a big decision, and she wanted to make sure she chose wisely. Clara parked her old sedan near the entrance and stepped out, taking a deep breath before walking inside. The showroom was bright and spacious, filled with shiny cars of all shapes and sizes. Spotlights illuminated the vehicles, making them look almost magical under the glow. Clara wandered around, admiring the sleek designs and vibrant colors. Her eyes landed on a beautiful red convertible parked right in the middle of the room. Its glossy finish sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and Clara couldn't help but imagine herself cruising down the open road with the wind in her hair. As she stood there, lost in thought, a salesperson approached her. He was dressed sharply in a suit and tie, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said with a polite smile. "Is there anything I can help you with today?" Clara nodded eagerly and gestured toward the red convertible. "I'd like to know more about this one," she said. "It looks amazing. Can I take it for a test drive?" The salesperson hesitated for a moment, studying Clara carefully. His gaze swept over her casual clothes and plain hairstyle, and something in his expression changed. Without realizing it, he had already formed an opinion about her based on how she looked. In his mind, someone dressed so simply probably wouldn't be able to afford a car like that. Rather than saying yes or no outright, he gave her a vague answer. "Oh, well, let me check with my manager first," he said, backing away slightly. "I'll be right back." Clara waited patiently, running her fingers along the smooth surface of the car as she admired it from different angles. But as the minutes ticked by, she began to feel uneasy. The salesperson didn't return immediately as he had promised. Instead, he disappeared behind a closed door at the far end of the showroom, leaving her standing alone. When he finally reappeared several minutes later, his demeanor was different. He avoided meeting her eyes and offered her a weak apology. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "We're very busy right now, and we can't accommodate a test drive at this time." Clara blinked in surprise, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected such a dismissive response, especially after expressing genuine interest in the car. For a moment, she considered arguing or insisting further, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way the salesperson avoided looking at her, or perhaps it was the slight smirk on his face as he spoke. Whatever it was, Clara felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She mumbled a quiet thank you and turned to leave, her cheeks burning with shame. As she walked back to her old sedan, Clara replayed the interaction in her mind. Had she done something wrong? Was there something about the way she looked that made the salesperson assume she wasn't serious? These questions swirled in her head as she drove home, her mood dampened by the experience. Little did she know, this seemingly small incident would soon lead to something much bigger, something that would teach the arrogant salesperson and his colleagues a lesson they would never forget. When Clara arrived home, she found her husband, Robert, sitting in their living room reading a book. Robert was a successful businessman who owned one of the largest auto dealerships in the region. Despite his achievements, He remained humble and down to earth, always treating people with respect and fairness. Clara sighed as she sank onto the couch beside him, still feeling the sting of rejection from earlier. Sensing that something was bothering her, Robert put down his book and turned to face her. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated, for a moment, debating whether or not to tell him what had happened, but eventually she decided to share the story. In simple words, she recounted every detail: the red convertible, the salesperson's hesitation, and the eventual refusal. As she spoke, Robert's expression grew darker. His usually calm demeanor shifted into one of quiet anger. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could anyone treat a potential customer so poorly, especially in an industry where reputation meant everything? Robert listened intently, letting Clara finish her story before responding. When she was done, he placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Don't worry about it," he said firmly. "They'll regret treating you that way." There was a determined glint in his eye, and Clara knew instantly that he had already begun formulating a plan. Though she appreciated his support, part of her wondered if confronting the situation directly was the best course of action. Still, she trusted Robert completely and decided to let him handle it however he saw fit. Without wasting any time, Robert grabbed his keys and headed out the door. His mind raced with thoughts of how to address the issue. He knew exactly which dealership Clara had visited. It was a smaller competitor that often tried to undercut his prices. While he didn't have any personal grudges against them, he believed strongly in the importance of treating customers with dignity and respect. If they were willing to judge someone based on appearances, then they didn't deserve to stay in business, at least not without facing some consequences. As Robert drove toward the dealership, he rehearsed what he would say. He wanted to make sure his message came across clearly without escalating into unnecessary conflict. At the same time, he couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction building inside him. The idea of turning the tables on the arrogant salesperson brought a small smile to his lips. By the time he arrived at the showroom, Robert was ready to put his plan into motion. What happened next would leave a lasting impression, not just on the staff at the dealership, but on everyone who heard the story afterward. Robert parked his car in the same lot where Clara had left her old sedan just hours earlier. Before stepping out, he took a moment to compose himself. He didn't want to storm into the dealership and cause a scene, but he also knew he couldn't let the incident slide. His goal was simple: to remind them of the importance of treating every customer with respect. With that thought in mind, he stepped out of his car and walked toward the showroom entrance. Unlike Clara, Robert dressed casually for the occasion: jeans, a plain shirt, and sneakers. He wanted to blend in with the other customers browsing around. If the salesperson who had dismissed Clara based on appearances was going to learn anything, it would be that looks could be deceiving. As he entered the showroom, he noticed the same red convertible still sitting proudly in the center of the room. It gleamed under the bright lights, almost mocking him as if it knew what had happened earlier. Robert wandered over to the car, pretending to inspect it closely. He ran his fingers along its polished surface and peered inside the driver's seat, all while keeping an eye out for the salesperson. Sure enough, within moments, the same man who had turned Clara away approached him with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, sir," the salesperson said smoothly. "Is there anything I can help you with today?" Robert nodded and gestured toward the convertible. "I'm interested in this one," he said. "Can you tell me more about it?" The salesperson launched into his pitch, listing off the car's features and specifications with enthusiasm. Robert listened patiently, nodding occasionally to keep up the act. But then, as the salesperson paused to take a breath, Robert dropped the first hint of what was to come. "Actually," he said casually, "my wife came here earlier today. She really liked this car too." At those words, the salesperson froze. His confident smile faltered slightly as he studied Robert's face more carefully. "Your wife?" he asked cautiously. Robert nodded, maintaining his calm demeanor. "Yes, she stopped by this afternoon. She wanted to take it for a test drive, but I think something came up and she wasn't able to." The salesperson's eyes widened as realization dawned on him. This unassuming man standing before him was married to the very woman he had dismissed so rudely. For a brief moment, the salesperson seemed unsure of how to respond. He stammered, trying to find the right words. "Oh, yes. I remember now," he said, though it was clear he didn't remember much at all. "I'm sorry if there was any inconvenience." Robert raised an eyebrow, his tone sharpening ever so slightly. "Inconvenience? That's an interesting way to put it. From what my wife told me, you refused to let her test drive the car altogether." The salesperson's face flushed red as he scrambled to explain himself. "Sir, I assure you we were just following protocol," he said quickly. "We're often very busy and sometimes we have to prioritize certain requests." But Robert cut him off mid-sentence. "Protocol?" he asked, his voice firm but controlled. "So your protocol is to judge people based on how they look? Because that's exactly what happened to my wife." The room grew quiet as nearby customers and employees turned their attention toward the exchange. The salesperson shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that he was losing control of the situation. "Sir, please understand, it wasn't personal." He tried again. "It's just, well, we need to make sure our resources are used wisely." Robert stared at him for a long moment, letting the weight of the comment sink in. Then, without raising his voice, he delivered the knockout blow. "You might want to reconsider your approach," Robert said evenly. "Because I own one of the largest dealerships in this region, and I can promise you, we don't treat our customers like that. Ever." The salesperson's jaw dropped, and for a second, he looked like he might faint. Realization spread across his face. Not only had he insulted a potential buyer, but he had done so in front of someone who could easily crush his business with a single phone call. Before the salesperson could recover, Robert continued, "Let me make something clear. Every person who walks into your showroom deserves respect regardless of what they wear or how they look. You never know who they are or what connections they might have. And even if they aren't wealthy or influential, they deserve the same level of service as anyone else. That's how you build trust and loyalty, and that's how you stay in business." By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, including the dealership's manager, who had been alerted to the commotion. The manager hurried over, his expression a mix of panic and confusion. "Sir, may I assist you with something?" he asked nervously. Robert turned to him, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I hope so," he replied, "because I'm here to address a serious issue with how your team treats customers. My wife visited earlier today and was treated poorly simply because of how she looked. I won't stand for that. Not from anyone, and certainly not from a competitor." The manager glanced at the salesperson, who was practically sweating bullets by now. "Please accept our apologies, sir," the manager said hastily. "This is unacceptable behavior, and we will take immediate action to ensure it doesn't happen again." Robert crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "Apologies are a start," he said, "but actions speak louder than words. Starting today, I'm pulling all partnerships and collaborations between my company and yours. Consider this a lesson in humility and a reminder of how important it is to treat everyone with dignity." The manager's face turned pale as he realized the gravity of the situation. Losing a partnership with Robert's dealership meant losing access to valuable resources, promotions, and referrals. It was a blow they couldn't afford to ignore. Meanwhile, the salesperson stood frozen, his career hanging by a thread. The entire room was silent as Robert turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned audience and a dealership scrambling to pick up the pieces. When Robert returned home later that evening, Clara was waiting for him in the living room. She looked up expectantly as he entered, curiosity written all over her face. "Well?" she asked. "What happened?" Robert smiled and sat down beside her, recounting the events of the day in detail. Clara listened intently, her eyes widening as he described the confrontation. By the end of the story, she couldn't help but laugh softly. "I guess they learned their lesson," she said, shaking her head. Robert nodded, his expression serious once more. "They did. But more importantly, I hope this reminds everyone, including us, that kindness and respect should never depend on appearances." People are more than what they wear or drive. They deserve to be treated fairly, no matter what. Clara reached out and squeezed his hand, grateful for his support. Though the incident had been upsetting, it had also brought them closer together, and as they sat there talking late into the night, they both knew that justice had been served, not just for Clara, but for anyone who had ever been judged unfairly. Sometimes life had a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected ways. The next morning, news of the confrontation at the dealership spread like wildfire. Employees whispered about it in hushed tones during breaks, and customers who had overheard snippets of the exchange couldn't resist sharing the story with friends and family. By lunchtime, nearly everyone in town seemed to know what had happened. The salesperson, whose name was Greg, became the center of attention, not in a good way. His colleagues avoided making eye contact with him, and even his manager kept a safe distance, clearly embarrassed by the entire situation. Greg spent most of the day staring at his desk, replaying the events in his mind. He couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. One moment, he had been casually dismissing Clara because of her simple appearance, and the next, he was facing her husband, a powerful dealership owner who could ruin his career with a single decision. Greg felt a mix of shame and fear as he realized just how wrong he had been. Deep down, he knew Robert was right. Judging people based on their looks wasn't fair or professional, but admitting that didn't make him feel any better about the mess he had created. Meanwhile, the dealership's manager called an emergency meeting with his staff. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense as employees filed in, avoiding each other's eyes. When everyone was seated, the manager cleared his throat and began speaking. As you all know, we had an incident yesterday involving one of our customers and her husband, he said, choosing his words carefully. This is not the kind of behavior we tolerate here, and it certainly isn't the image we want to project to the public. He went on to explain the consequences of Robert's visit, the loss of partnerships, damaged reputation, and potential drop in sales. We need to fix this, he said firmly. Starting today, every customer who walks through those doors will be treated with respect no matter who they are or what they look like. Do I make myself clear? The employees nodded silently, though some looked more guilty than others. Greg sat slumped in his chair, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Later, that afternoon, Clara received a delivery at her doorstep. It was a large bouquet of flowers accompanied by a handwritten note. She opened the envelope cautiously, curious about who it could be from. The note read, "Dear Mrs. Clara, please accept our sincerest apologies for the way you were treated during your recent visit to our dealership. We deeply regret the disrespect shown to you and assure you that such behavior does not reflect our values. To make amends, we would like to offer you a VIP experience at our showroom whenever you're ready. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. It has reminded us of the importance of treating every individual with kindness and respect." Clara read the note twice, her emotions shifting between surprise and satisfaction. Part of her appreciated the gesture, knowing that the apology came from genuine remorse, but another part of her wondered if it was too little, too late. After all, the damage had already been done. Still, she decided to keep an open mind. Maybe this experience would inspire positive change, not just for the dealership, but for anyone who heard the story. Word of the apology reached Robert later that evening when Clara showed him the flowers and note. He studied them thoughtfully, his expression softening slightly. "It seems they're trying to make things right," he said after a pause. Clara nodded. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked. Robert shrugged. "Only time will tell," he replied. "But if nothing else, this whole situation has sent a strong message. Hopefully they'll remember it moving forward." Over the next few days, the dealership made visible efforts to improve its service. Employees underwent additional training sessions focused on customer care and professionalism. Posters reminding staff to treat everyone equally were hung in break rooms and offices. Even Greg, despite feeling humiliated, threw himself into the new initiatives, determined to prove he had learned his lesson. While some might have doubted his sincerity, Others noticed a real change in his attitude. He greeted customers warmly, listened attentively to their needs, and never once judged them based on appearances again. In the meantime, Clara and Robert found themselves becoming minor celebrities in their small town. Neighbors stopped them on the street to congratulate Robert for standing up for his wife, while shopkeepers shared jokes about the arrogant salesperson getting his comeuppance. At first, Clara felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, but she soon warmed to the idea. People weren't just talking about her, they were discussing the broader issue of fairness and respect. It felt good to know that something positive had come out of an otherwise unpleasant experience. One evening, as they sat together on their front porch watching the sunset, Clara turned to Robert with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined something like this would happen when I went to look at that car." Robert chuckled. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But sometimes life throws us surprises and lessons that we don't expect." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Well, I'm glad it turned out the way it did," she said. "Not just for me, but for everyone involved." Robert wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "So am I," he said. "And if this story helps even one person think twice before judging someone else, then it was worth it." They sat there in comfortable silence, enjoying the peacefulness of the evening. Though the incident had been challenging, it had also strengthened their bond and reminded them of the values they held dear. As weeks passed, the buzz around the dealership incident gradually faded, replaced by other stories and events. But the lessons it taught remained fresh in people's minds. Customers began noticing the improved service at the dealership, and slowly but surely its reputation started to recover. Greg worked harder than ever, earning back the trust of both his colleagues and clients. And Clara? She eventually returned to the showroom, not to buy the red convertible, but to test drive a practical SUV that suited her lifestyle perfectly. This time she was greeted with warmth and respect, leaving with a smile on her face. Looking back, Clara realized that the experience had changed her in subtle ways. She carried herself with a newfound confidence, knowing that she deserved to be treated fairly no matter where she went. And Robert? He continued running his successful dealership, always emphasizing the importance of kindness and integrity. Together they proved that even the smallest actions could spark meaningful change, and that justice, when served, could leave a lasting impact on everyone involved. A few weeks after the incident, life in the small town began to settle back into its usual rhythm. The buzz surrounding Clara's experience at the dealership had died down, but the story still lingered in people's minds. It became one of those tales that locals would bring up during casual conversations, at coffee shops, family dinners, or even while waiting in line at the grocery store. "Remember that time Clara stood up for herself?" someone might say, prompting nods and smiles from others who knew exactly what they were talking about. For Clara, things felt different now, not because she had gained fame, but because she carried a quiet sense of pride with her wherever she went. She no longer second-guessed herself when walking into unfamiliar places or speaking her mind. If anything, the incident had taught her that standing firm in your dignity could lead to unexpected victories, and though she didn't seek attention, she couldn't help but feel grateful for how everything had turned out, not just for herself, but for the broader message it sent about fairness and respect. Robert, too, noticed the subtle changes in his wife. He admired her newfound confidence and often found himself reflecting on the role he had played in helping her reclaim it. At first he had acted out of anger, frustration over how poorly Clara had been treated, but as time passed he realized their actions had sparked something bigger than either of them could have anticipated. The dealership wasn't the only place affected by the fallout. People throughout the community started thinking twice before making snap judgments based on appearances. At the dealership, efforts to rebuild its reputation continued steadily. Employees worked hard to implement the new policies introduced by management, focusing on treating every customer equally. Greg, the salesperson who had initially dismissed Clara, became almost overly eager to prove he had changed. He greeted visitors warmly, listened attentively to their needs, and went above and beyond to ensure they felt valued. While some colleagues teased him lightly about his transformation, most appreciated his sincerity and dedication. Slowly but surely, customers began returning to the showroom, noticing the improved service and friendlier atmosphere. One day, a young woman walked into the dealership, her hands gripping the straps of a worn backpack. She wandered around nervously, clearly unsure of where to start. When Greg approached her, his tone was gentle and welcoming. "Hi there. Is there anything I can help you with today?" he asked, offering a warm smile. The woman hesitated for a moment before pointing toward a compact sedan parked near the entrance. "I was wondering if I could take that one for a test drive," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Greg nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. Let me grab the keys and we'll get started right away." As he hurried off to prepare the car, the woman looked around, half expecting someone to stop him or tell her it wasn't possible. But no one did. Instead, another employee offered her a cup of coffee while she waited, striking up a friendly conversation about her preferences and budget. By the time Greg returned, the woman seemed visibly more relaxed. During the test drive, Greg answered all her questions patiently, explaining the car's features without pressuring her to make a decision. When they returned to the showroom, she thanked him sincerely, saying she'd think about it and discuss it with her partner. Though she didn't buy the car that day, Greg felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing he had done his job well. More importantly, he understood why treating customers with respect mattered. It wasn't just about making a sale. It was about building trust and creating a positive experience. Back at home, Clara and Robert continued living their lives as usual, though they occasionally found themselves discussing the aftermath of the incident. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Robert brought up a question that had been on his mind. "Do you think we should go back to that dealership someday?" he asked, glancing at Clara curiously. She raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. "Why would we do that?" she replied. "You already got your point across." Robert chuckled softly. "That's true," he admitted. "But I was thinking about giving them a chance to show they've really changed. Plus, maybe you'd like to see how things are going for yourself." Clara considered this for a moment, tapping her fingers against the armrest. She said thoughtfully. "It does sound interesting, but only if you're okay with it." "Of course I am," Robert said with a grin. "Besides, it could be fun to see their reaction when they realize it's us." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "You just want to watch them squirm, don't you?" Robert shrugged innocently. "Maybe a little," he confessed. "But seriously, I think it would mean a lot, to them and to us, if we showed that forgiveness is part of moving forward." After some discussion, they decided to visit the dealership the following weekend. On the appointed day, they drove together in Robert's car, arriving at the showroom shortly after lunch. As they stepped inside, several employees recognized them immediately. There was a brief moment of awkwardness as everyone froze, unsure of how to react. Then, the manager hurried over, his expression a mix of nervousness and gratitude. "Mr. and Mrs. Clara," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming. We truly appreciate the opportunity to welcome you back." Clara smiled politely, accepting his handshake. "We thought it was time to see how things are going," she said, simply. The manager nodded, gesturing for them to follow him. "Please, let me show you around. We've made quite a few changes since your last visit." As they toured the showroom, Clara and Robert noticed the improvements right away. The staff was attentive and courteous, treating every customer with genuine care. Posters on the walls emphasized values like respect, integrity, and inclusivity. Even Greg, who kept glancing at them nervously from across the room, seemed genuinely committed to doing better. By the end of the visit, Clara felt satisfied with what she saw. "It looks like you've put in a lot of effort," she told the manager honestly. "I hope it stays this way." The manager nodded earnestly. "It will," he promised. "We've learned our lesson, thanks to you both." As they prepared to leave, Greg mustered the courage to approach them. "Mrs. Clara," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I'll never make that mistake again." Clara studied him for a moment before smiling gently. "Thank you," she said. "I believe you." On the drive home, Clara and Robert reflected on the visit. "They've come a long way," Clara remarked, gazing out the window. Robert agreed. "They have," he said, "and hopefully this experience will stay with them, and with everyone else who hears the story, for a long time." Clara leaned back in her seat, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons, often in ways no one expected. But sometimes, those lessons were exactly what people needed to grow and to become better versions of themselves. As the weeks turned into months, the story of Clara and Robert's encounter with the dealership continued to ripple through the community. It became more than just a tale of justice served. It evolved into a reminder of the power of kindness, humility, and second chances. People often found themselves reflecting on their own actions, wondering if they had ever judged someone unfairly, or dismissed them without giving them a fair chance. The incident wasn't just about one salesperson's mistake. It was a mirror, held up to society, showing how easy it was to make assumptions based on appearances. For Clara, life returned to its usual pace, but she carried the lessons of that day with her wherever she went. She noticed subtle changes in how others treated her, not because they knew her story, but because she exuded a quiet confidence that commanded respect. Whether she was shopping at the local market, attending church gatherings, or visiting friends, people responded to her warmth and authenticity. It was as though the experience had unlocked something within her, a belief that she deserved to be treated well no matter the situation. Robert, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the owner of a successful dealership, he had always prided himself on treating his employees and customers fairly. But witnessing firsthand how quickly things could go wrong when respect was absent made him even more vigilant. He began hosting workshops for his staff, emphasizing the importance of empathy and professionalism. "Every person who walks through our doors has value," he would say during these sessions. "It doesn't matter what car they drive or what clothes they wear. What matters is how we make them feel." The impact of Robert's efforts extended beyond his own business. Other dealerships in the area took notice of the changes he implemented and started adopting similar practices. Slowly but surely, the entire industry in the region began shifting toward a culture of inclusivity and respect. Greg, the salesperson, who had once dismissed Clara, became an advocate for this movement. He shared his story openly during team meetings, encouraging his colleagues to learn from his mistakes. "I'll never forget the day I underestimated someone," he said candidly. "It taught me that you can't judge a book by its cover, or a customer by their clothes." Meanwhile, the dealership where the incident had occurred worked tirelessly to rebuild its reputation. They launched a campaign called "Respect Starts Here," which focused on educating employees and customers alike about the importance of treating everyone equally. Flyers were distributed, social media posts were shared, and community events were organized to spread the message. Customers began to notice the difference, not just in the way they were treated, but in the overall atmosphere of the showroom. It felt less like a place trying to sell cars and more like a space built on trust and connection. One sunny afternoon, several months after Clara and Robert's follow-up visit, the dealership hosted a special event to celebrate the progress they had made. Local residents were invited to attend, along with representatives from other businesses in the area. Clara and Robert received personal invitations, which they accepted graciously. When they arrived, they were greeted with applause, a gesture that caught them both off guard. The manager stepped forward, microphone in hand, and addressed the crowd. "Today, we're here not just to celebrate the growth of our dealership, but to honor two individuals who inspired us to do better," he said, gesturing toward Clara and Robert. "Their courage and grace reminded us of the values we should have been practicing all along. For that, we are deeply grateful." The audience erupted into cheers, and Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't expected such heartfelt gratitude, and it touched her deeply. After the speeches and presentations, guests were invited to mingle and explore the showroom. Clara wandered around, marveling at how much had changed since her first visit. Employees greeted visitors warmly, engaging them in genuine conversations rather than pushy sales pitches. Even the decor had been updated to create a more welcoming environment, with cozy seating areas and refreshments available for anyone who needed a break. At one point, Greg approached Clara again, this time with a broad smile. "Thank you for coming back," he said sincerely. "Seeing you here means so much to all of us." Clara nodded, returning his smile. "I'm glad to see how far you've come," she replied. "Keep doing what you're doing. It makes a real difference." Greg's eyes softened with gratitude, and he promised to continue striving for excellence. Later that evening, as Clara and Robert drove home, they reflected on the day's events. "It's amazing how much can change when people are willing to listen and grow," Clara said thoughtfully. Robert agreed. "And it's not just about fixing mistakes. It's about creating something positive that lasts," he added. That dealership didn't just recover, it transformed into something better. And that's something worth celebrating. Clara leaned back in her seat, feeling a deep sense of peace. Life had thrown her an unexpected challenge, but instead of letting it bring her down, she had risen above it and inspired others to do the same. The experience had strengthened her relationship with Robert, brought her closer to her community, and reinforced her belief in the goodness of people. Most importantly, it had shown her that fairness and respect weren't just ideals to strive for. They were choices each person could make every single day. As they pulled into their driveway, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Clara stepped out of the car and took a moment to soak in the beauty of the evening. "You know," she said softly, turning to Robert, "sometimes I think about how different things might have been if I hadn't gone to that dealership that day." Robert smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Different, sure," he said, "but maybe not better. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest growth." They stood there together, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the hills. Though the incident had been challenging, it had ultimately brought light into their lives, and into the lives of countless others. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a car or a dealership. It was a story about humanity, resilience, and the enduring power of kindness. And that, they both knew, was something truly worth cherishing. Months turned into a year, and the story of Clara and Robert became a cherished tale in their small town. A legend of sorts, passed down from one generation to the next. It wasn't just a story about standing up for oneself or teaching someone a lesson. It was a reminder of how simple actions could spark meaningful change. People often joked that the red convertible Clara had admired so much should be renamed the car that changed everything, though no one ever suggested it to the dealership officially. Still, the memory of that day lingered like an invisible thread, weaving its way through conversations, decisions, and even dreams. For Clara, life moved forward with a quiet rhythm. She never did buy the red convertible. Instead, she settled on a practical SUV during her second visit to the dealership. It suited her lifestyle perfectly, allowing her to run errands, visit family, and explore the countryside without worry. But every time she drove past the showroom, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of what had transpired there. The incident had given her more than just a new car. It had given her confidence, perspective, and a deeper connection to her community. Robert, too, continued thriving in his role as a dealership owner. His workshops on empathy and professionalism became so popular that other businesses began inviting him to speak at their events. He traveled to neighboring towns, sharing the story of Clara's experience and emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with dignity. "It's not rocket science," he would say during these talks. "Just look people in the eye, listen to them, and remember they're human beings, not transactions." His words resonated deeply, inspiring countless professionals to rethink their approach to customer service. At the dealership where the incident had taken place, the transformation remained evident. Employees carried themselves with pride, knowing They were part of an organization committed to doing the right thing. Salespeople greeted customers warmly, regardless of their appearance or background, and managers ensured that everyone felt valued. Greg, once the source of the problem, had grown into one of the most trusted members of the team. He often shared his story with new hires, reminding them that mistakes could be opportunities for growth if handled with humility and determination. One crisp autumn morning, the dealership decided to host another community event. This time, a charity drive aimed at helping families in need. Food, clothing, and toy donations poured in from all corners of the town, filling the showroom to capacity. Clara and Robert attended, bringing boxes of supplies and spending hours volunteering alongside neighbors and friends. As they worked together, sorting items and packing them into trucks, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what true community looked like, people coming together to support one another, united by shared values and experiences. During a break, the manager approached Clara and Robert holding 2 mugs of hot cider. "Thank you for being here today," he said, handing them each a drink. "And thank you for everything you've done for us over the past year. We wouldn't be where we are now without you." Clara shook her head modestly. "You're the ones who deserve credit," she replied. "You've worked hard to make things better, and it shows." The manager smiled, glancing around the bustling room. "Honestly, I think we all learned something from this journey," he admitted. "Not just about business, but about life. Treating people with respect isn't just good practice, it's the right thing to do." Robert nodded in agreement. "Exactly," he said. "And when you get it right, everyone benefits." As the day drew to a close, Clara and Robert stood outside the dealership, watching volunteers load the last of the donations into waiting vehicles. The air smelled of fallen leaves and wood smoke, and laughter echoed through the parking lot as people exchanged hugs and farewells. Clara wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck, feeling the cool breeze against her cheeks. "Do you think we'll ever stop hearing about that day?" she asked half-jokingly. Robert chuckled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Probably not, and that's okay," he said. "Some stories are meant to stick around because they remind us of who we are and who we want to be." Clara leaned into him, gazing up at the starry sky. "You're right," she murmured. "Besides, it's kind of nice knowing we made a difference even if it was just a small one." In truth, the difference they had made wasn't small at all. Their actions had inspired a chain reaction, touching lives far beyond what they could have imagined. Strangers who heard the story began reflecting on their own behavior, vowing to treat others with more kindness and understanding. Businesses adopted policies centered on inclusivity and fairness, creating environments where everyone felt welcome. And communities came together, proving that even the simplest acts of courage could lead to lasting change. Years later, when Clara and Robert sat on their porch watching grandchildren play in the yard, they still talked about that fateful day. They laughed about how nervous Greg had been and marveled at how much he had grown since then. They reminisced about the charity drives, the workshops, and the countless conversations sparked by their experience. Most importantly, they celebrated the fact that their little town had become a kinder, more compassionate place. All because one woman refused to let someone else's judgment define her worth. Life, they realized, was full of moments like these, challenges disguised as opportunities, lessons hidden within struggles, and connections forged through shared humanity. Clara and Robert had faced theirs head-on, choosing to turn adversity into action and pain into purpose. And while they didn't set out to change the world, they had certainly left their mark. One smile, one handshake, and one act of kindness at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the fields, Clara reached for Robert's hand. "You know," she said softly, "I wouldn't trade any of it. Not the embarrassment, not the frustration, not even that silly red convertible, because it led us here." Robert squeezed her hand gently, his eyes twinkling with affection. "Here's pretty great," he agreed. Together they sat in silence, savoring the beauty of the moment and the legacy they had built, not just for themselves, but for everyone lucky enough to hear their story.